It is nighttime in Rome, AD 64. You are walking through a narrow street, dimly illuminated by a few flickering torches mounted on brick walls. The air is filled with the smell of smoke, freshly baked bread, and the less pleasant odors rising from nearby drains. Above you, 5- and 6-story apartment buildings lean precariously toward one another. They are so close together that the night sky is barely visible between them. These are the insulae, Rome's crowded multi-story apartment blocks where much of the city's population lives packed together. And what a population it is! You are standing inside the largest city the world had ever seen. Around 1 million people call Rome home. Pause for a moment and think about what that means. No electricity, no cameras, no telephones. 1 million people living side by side with no modern way to call for help when something goes wrong. And many things could go wrong. Thieves waited patiently in dark alleyways. Pickpockets moved through crowded marketplaces. Organized gangs raided homes late at night. When the sun went down, Rome became a completely different city. The Roman satirist Juvenal once wrote that it was almost madness to leave home at night without first making a will. Roof tiles could fall from above and strike pedestrians. Objects were thrown from windows. Ordinary people sometimes disappeared without anyone ever learning what had happened to them. This raises a fascinating question. How did a city of nearly 1 million people avoid descending into complete chaos without a modern police force? How do you protect 1 million citizens scattered throughout a maze of narrow streets, in a world where the nights are truly dark, and nobody can simply call for help? The answer may surprise you, because the truth is that Rome did not have a police force in the modern sense of the word. And the institution that eventually emerged to provide security was not created because of fears of robbery or murder. It was born from something entirely different, something you would never expect. But before we get to that story, we need to destroy a common myth. Many people imagine Rome as a perfectly organized machine of law and order, with soldiers patrolling every street corner. That image is wrong. For much of the Roman Republic, maintaining order was considered largely a private responsibility. If someone robbed you, it was often your responsibility to pursue the thief and bring them before a magistrate. There was no emergency number to call, no police station waiting around the corner to take your report. Justice depended heavily on who you were, your social status, and, perhaps most importantly, how much money you had. And here we encounter the first great contradiction of Roman society. If you were wealthy, your home was a fortress. You had slaves guarding your doors, trained dogs, high walls, and often private bodyguards. You could hire strong men to recover stolen property or intimidate your enemies. In many ways, security could be purchased. But if you were poor, and the overwhelming majority of Rome's 1 million inhabitants were poor, the situation was completely different. You lived in one of those fragile apartment buildings, often sharing cramped rooms with your family. You had no guards, no watchdogs, no private protection. Between you and the dangers of the night stood only a thin wooden door. When something was stolen from a poor family, nothing usually happened. There was often nobody to turn to. The law existed, but its protection was uneven. Now imagine living this way. You spend the day selling vegetables in the market. At night, you return to your tiny room on the 4th floor of an overcrowded apartment building. You know the wooden structure could catch fire. You know the ceiling might collapse. And if a thief breaks in, you are largely on your own. For hundreds of thousands of Romans, this was everyday reality. Yet despite all of this, Rome did not collapse. Something was holding the city together. Something that may be difficult for us to see today, but was obvious to those who lived there. And that is exactly what we are about to uncover. To understand it, we need to travel even further back in time. Long before that night, in AD 64. For centuries, the closest thing Rome had to an organized urban security system was a small group of officials known as the Trisviri Capitals, literally, the 3 men for criminal matters. These were young magistrates at the beginning of their political careers. Only 3 men. Three officials responsible for helping maintain order in a city that was growing beyond control. They supervised the public prison, oversaw executions, and were theoretically responsible for aspects of public security. But think about the numbers. Hundreds of thousands of people. Only three officials. It would be like asking three people today to patrol an entire modern metropolis on foot, with no vehicles, no radios, and no support systems. The mathematics simply did not work. They relied heavily on assistants, public slaves, and various helpers who performed the difficult tasks of transporting prisoners and dealing with minor emergencies. Even so, the system was so fragile that it barely deserved to be called a police force. In practice, much of Rome's security depended on the crowd itself. If a thief was spotted in a busy marketplace, someone would shout for help. Bystanders often joined the pursuit. Public shame could be a powerful deterrent. The fear of being recognized, exposed, or punished by one's own neighbors prevented many crimes before they happened. People knew each other, and that familiarity created a kind of informal security network. But everything changed after dark. When the crowds disappeared and the streets emptied, Rome became a much more dangerous place. There were attempts to solve this problem. At various times, groups of men were organized to patrol the streets at night. But these efforts were usually small, poorly coordinated, and often dissolved due to political disagreements. And here, we encounter a fascinating and somewhat surprising detail. The Romans were deeply afraid of creating a permanent armed force within the city itself. To them, soldiers patrolling the streets did not necessarily represent safety. They represented danger. A powerful general with loyal troops could use that force to seize political control. Roman history was filled with examples of ambitious men using military power to advance their own interests. As a result, Rome tolerated a certain amount of crime, rather than risk creating an internal army that might one day threaten its freedom. The Romans chose the dangers of the streets over the dangers of concentrated power. It was a calculated trade-off, and it reveals something important about Roman society. Security was valuable, but liberty was considered valuable too. For a long time, Rome believed it was safer to endure disorder than to place too much power in the hands of a single authority. Yet eventually, something happened that forced the city to reconsider. And surprisingly, it was not crime. It was fire. And now we arrive at the turning point of the story. Earlier, I mentioned that Rome's eventual solution to public security was not born from fear of thieves or murderers. It was born from something far more destructive: fire. Think again about the city around you. Wooden apartment buildings stacked closely together, open cooking fires, oil lamps burning late into the night, narrow streets where buildings almost touched one another. Rome was a city built for disaster. Fires were terrifyingly common. A single spark could spread through an entire neighborhood within hours. Thousands could lose their homes. Hundreds could lose their lives. In some cases, entire districts were reduced to ashes. One of the wealthiest men in Roman history, Marcus Licinius Crassus, saw opportunity in this danger. Crassus maintained a private firefighting force. At first glance, that might sound admirable, but there was a catch. When a building caught fire, Crassus's men often refused to act immediately. Instead, agents would approach the desperate owner and offer to buy the burning property for a fraction of its value. Only after a deal had been accepted would the firefighters begin their work. It was protection transformed into business. Disaster transformed into profit. For many Romans, fire itself had become a form of extortion. Eventually, the situation became impossible to ignore. The man who finally changed everything was Rome's first emperor, Augustus. After a series of devastating fires, Augustus concluded that the safety of the capital could no longer depend on private interests or temporary solutions. Rome needed a permanent organization, a force capable of protecting the city every night. And so, in AD 6, Augustus created one of the most remarkable institutions in Roman history, the Vigiles. Their name is often translated as the Watchmen or the Guardians. Officially, they were firefighters, But they would soon become much more than that. The force was divided into 7 cohorts containing thousands of men. Rome itself was divided into 14 districts. Each cohort was assigned responsibility for 2 districts. For the first time in its history, the city possessed a large-scale organization dedicated to monitoring and protecting the urban environment. What makes the story even more fascinating is who these men were. They were not members of Rome's elite. Most were freedmen, former slaves who had earned or purchased their freedom. Service in the Vigiles offered an opportunity for social advancement. It brought respect, it brought stability, and after years of loyal service it could even provide a path toward full Roman citizenship. Imagine the significance of that transformation. Men who had once occupied the lowest levels of Roman society were now entrusted with protecting the empire's greatest city. A substantial portion of Rome's nighttime security rested in the hands of former slaves. Now imagine yourself walking once more through the streets of Rome after dark. This time, however, you hear approaching footsteps. Steady, confident, disciplined. A group of men emerges from the shadows. Some carry leather buckets. Others carry large sponges and thick blankets soaked in vinegar. Several operate hand-powered water pumps capable of spraying water onto advancing flames. Others carry hooks and demolition tools designed to pull down walls and create fire breaks before an inferno could spread from one building to the next. These are the Vigiles, and while they patrol the city searching for signs of fire, they are doing something else as well. They are watching everything, and that constant presence changed everything. The logic was simple. If thousands of men were already patrolling the streets every night in search of fires, they were inevitably going to encounter other problems as well. Thieves, street fights, organized gangs, escaped slaves, suspicious activity. The Vigiles could hardly ignore these things. And so, over time, their responsibilities expanded. Although they had been created as firefighters, they gradually became something that looked remarkably similar to a police force. They arrested criminals, recovered stolen property, captured runaway slaves, dispersed disturbances, and reported suspicious activities to higher authorities. No law officially transformed them into a modern police department. It happened naturally. The city's needs pushed them in that direction. For the first time in Roman history, ordinary citizens knew that someone might actually be watching the streets after dark. That alone had a powerful effect. Modern criminologists often point to a simple truth. The likelihood of being seen can prevent crime more effectively than the severity of punishment. The Vigiles unintentionally demonstrated this principle nearly 2,000 years ago. A thief who believes nobody is watching behaves differently from a thief who knows a patrol could appear at any moment. The mere possibility of observation changes human behavior. Think about a well-lit street today. Why does it often feel safer than a dark alley? Not because crime becomes impossible, but because visibility increases the risk of being caught. The same principle was operating in ancient Rome. The Vigiles created a sense of presence. A sense that someone was there, someone was watching, someone could intervene. And for many criminals, that uncertainty was enough to make them think twice. In a way, Rome had accidentally discovered one of the most effective tools of public security: visible patrols. Not harsher punishments, not larger prisons, simply the knowledge that authority might appear when least expected. Yet we should resist the temptation to romanticize this story. The Vigiles improved security, but they did not eliminate danger. Rome remained a difficult and often dangerous city. Poor neighborhoods generally received less attention than wealthy districts. Many crimes still went unpunished, and justice itself remained deeply unequal. A wealthy citizen accused of wrongdoing could often expect a careful legal process. A poor citizen or a slave frequently faced swift and brutal punishment. The law existed, but its protection was not distributed equally. The contrast between rich and poor that we saw earlier never truly disappeared. It merely took a different form. And there was another darker side to this system. The same organization that protected the population could also help monitor it. Authorities occasionally used surveillance and patrols not only to fight crime, but also to observe gatherings, monitor political activity, and maintain imperial control. This created a tension that still exists today. The Watcher protects, but the Watcher also possesses power over those being watched. Rome encountered this dilemma nearly 2,000 years ago, and in many ways we are still wrestling with it ourselves. So what can a city that existed 2,000 years ago teach us today? Perhaps more than we might expect. The first lesson is about human ingenuity. Faced with an enormous problem, the Romans did not have the tools we consider essential today. They had no emergency call centers, no surveillance cameras, no patrol cars, no modern police departments. Yet they still found a solution. Not a perfect solution, but a workable one. A force originally created to fight fires gradually evolved into an organization that helped protect one of the largest cities on Earth. Many of the men who carried out this responsibility were former slaves, individuals who began life at the bottom of society and eventually became guardians of the city streets. Long before modern criminology existed, the Romans stumbled upon an important truth. Visibility can be more powerful than fear. The possibility of being observed can discourage wrongdoing before it ever occurs. The second lesson is that some of history's most important innovations emerge from unexpected places. Rome's closest equivalent to a police force was not created because lawmakers sat down and decided to fight crime. It emerged because the city was terrified of fire. In solving one problem, the Romans partially solved another. History is filled with similar examples. Many institutions and technologies that shape our lives today were originally designed for entirely different purposes. Progress is often less predictable than it appears in hindsight. And perhaps the most important lesson concerns inequality. Rome possessed written laws, a sophisticated administration, and thousands of men assigned to protect the city. Yet security was never distributed equally. The wealthy slept behind strong walls, guarded gates, and private protection. The poor slept behind thin wooden doors, hoping the dangers of the night would pass them by. 2,000 years later, the world has changed beyond recognition. Our cities are larger. Our technology is more advanced. Our methods of communication are instantaneous. Yet the fundamental question remains surprisingly familiar. Who receives protection? Who feels safe? And who remains vulnerable? Technology can improve security, but technology alone cannot determine how protection is distributed. That decision has always been a human one, and it remains a human one today. So the next time you walk beneath a streetlight, glance at a security camera, or reach for a phone that can summon help with a single touch, remember the resident of a Roman apartment building nearly 2,000 years ago. Imagine him sitting awake on the 4th floor of a crowded insula, listening to footsteps echoing through the darkness below, wondering whether they belong to a thief searching for an easy target, or to a patrol of vigiles carrying leather buckets and lanterns through the night. Between you and that Roman citizen lie 20 centuries of history. But the question at the heart of the story has never truly changed. When darkness falls, who is watching over us? Rome found its own imperfect answer. And in many ways, we are still searching for ours. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this, because everything is on record.